Hey folks, Steve here with a special Highway to the Kremlin video. This video is part 0 for the Borodino battle scenario video series within the overall series I'm covering this game in. And it is a part 0 that, if you look carefully, has been published after many of the other parts in the series and is sort of a cautionary video for you if you watch the rest of the series. Now, it's likely that if you're watching this at the time it was published, you're watching it after you've watched the other episodes in the series. But if you're a newcomer, I'm hoping to point out to you to watch this first and treat it truly as the initiating video to watch, because this is my opportunity to point out that over the videos of the Borodino battle scenario, a number of mistakes get made. Some for expediency, I missed a rule, something was easily forgotten, an interpretation of the rule was incorrect, something just got amiss. And that happened quite a lot in those videos. Now, fortunately for me, I have had commentators, even a specific one, pointing out these issues with timestamps. And so, my warning to you is, if you continue to watch the battle scenario videos after this one, please be aware that in the comments section there will be timestamps pointed out where a mistake was made. And ultimately, my mistakes should not be your mistakes. But after reaching out to the community, I was decided, hey, let's keep the videos up. Let's let those errors be examples of errors and try to talk about those things a bit more in this video so that you know what to watch out for. Because in the broad strokes and how I try to articulate the rules of the game are generally more or less correct. But there are specifics that matter, and in the struggle to identify these problems that I've had, I have constructed a uh, easily forgotten rules list that I'm working on getting posted to Board Game Geek. So if you are going to play along, or you're going to play this game after watching my videos, maybe you've already got a copy and you want to get it knocked out. Make sure to grab that player aid sheet from Board Game Geek, or at least watch this video so you can pick up on these easy things to forget that can negatively affect your game experience because you're not playing it correctly, or you're interpreting the rules differently than the way that they were intended. And this game does have challenges because of it having a standard rules book and a game specific rule book, exclusive rule book, even though this is the only 5x version of Campaigns of Napoleon that there is, and you're really trying to navigate these two rule books at the same time. And even within the standard rule book, there are important bits of information that are not necessarily where I think they should be, and could be easily missed as you're trying to read through the rules and want to execute the game and just get to playing and rolling dice. So in this video, we're going to talk about those easily forgettable rules and keep these in mind as I play in the battle scenario videos after this, that I'm getting some of these things wrong. And that was a learning experience for me. You are going to benefit from my failures here and be better equipped to play the game when you get to it. So what I'm going to do here is get the list of rules, and we're going to talk about each one. I'm going to try to move pretty quickly, but these are things that at one point or another, again, I either failed to implement properly, or in moments that it really mattered, I forgot about something. And I don't want you to forget or miss these important bits while you play the game. All right, let's look at the list here. You can follow along here quietly. Pause the video at any time you want to read these carefully, but a couple of things. When you go to do initiative movement, meaning without using a movement command, which is something you'll be able to do in the case where you need to roll a leader's initiative to activate, or choosing to activate that way, if you roll exactly the leader's initiative, while they do get to move and do stuff, they actually have one less movement point, which means if it's predominantly an infantry force, that would maybe normally have 5, it's going to have 4 instead. That could be a bummer because inevitably you're lucky, for a leader with a 4 initiative, 1 through 4 will activate, right? That's pretty good. But if you get a 4, you might not be able to go as far as you'd want to. And in fact, rolling 1 over your leader's initiative allows them to move 1 MP, which I found to be very important because that is enough to exit an enemy Zoc, assuming the force achieves its initiative roll with the resistance modifier for being in the Zoc. So what this means is on a forced march, if you don't want to be attacked by the enemy, you could roll, and so long as after you apply the resistance die roll modifier for comparing the leaders, the 2 different leaders' initiative, so long as you get at least 1 over your leader's initiative, so a 5 for a 4 leader or a 6 for a 5 initiative leader, you have enough movement points to leave the Zoc. So watch out for that. You can potentially get out of there and simply move away, or you're spending half a movement point to leave a Zoc and then maybe shift if you really needed to shift. So that could be really important. You get a little bit of a break here, where even with a leader that maybe doesn't have very good initiative, there's some potential chance that you can try to withdraw if you need to, or make whatever sort of adjustments you think you may need to make. And that could be, again, including entering a Zoc if you really, really had to during your normal march phase. Now, if a force starts adjacent to an enemy force, but not in its Zoc, the moving force has to spend 1 MP to enter. So again, if you look back up here, it could be if you want to get in your opponent's face here and you started the turn next to them, you could engage in their Zoc to potentially have a combat later in the turn, so long as you roll again at maybe even 1 over that initiative. So you can actually do a little bit of movement much of the time, but if you roll 2 over the leader's initiative, they're going to do nothing. Now, if you try to do a repulse, basically pushing back a force by having 5 times as many strength points, if you do that during forced marches on your enemy's player turn, that costs 1 additional MP to do the repulse. So you're not going to be able to do a whole bunch of repulsing on a forced march if you even do any at all. So watch out for that. That extra cost slows things down quite a bit. When retreating, you can sometimes, you have to do this, retreat to hexes adjacent to the enemy force instead of strictly away from them. This is important because what's forcing your retreat path is you have to be retreating towards your supply source. Well, it could be because of enemy maneuvering or your maneuvering that going towards your supply source kind of takes you in the direction of the enemy you were just fighting and maybe retreating from. But the key thing here in this game, because there's not, adjacent hex Zocs, you can actually like retreat. Well, I'm going to use this guy right here as an example. If you were forced to retreat by an enemy attacking you from this hex, you actually could retreat to this hex or this hex, even though it's adjacent to the enemy's hex attacking you. You could retreat, this way or that way, depending on what's better for you. Probably not over the river in this game, but you can retreat sort of around them if you have to. So keep that in mind. That is different than many war games where you are at times forced to just simply retreat away from your enemy. You don't necessarily have to do explicitly that. It is just you have to retreat, and that retreat could actually be adjacent to the enemy's original hex, and that's okay. This maybe has something to do with the fact that the size of these hexes is so large that you just have a better capability of kind of retreating around if you really, really have to. French Guard units, Young Guard, Old Guard, those associated units do not contribute to the total SPs for attrition calculations. So if Napoleon is, say, moving with a stack filled up with nothing of guards, they technically are not going to suffer any attrition. So important. You could have them part of a big stack, while only the strength points outside of the guard units is going to matter for the attrition calculation. So watch out for that. Supply source garrisons. So the supply source markers on the map, they do have an inherent garrison, and these garrisons negate enemy Zocs for all purposes in that hex, including for counterattack, but are also not able to be considered part of a force in and of itself. They cannot be repulsed. So if you happen to be fighting the enemy while they're sitting on top of their supply source, basically what it means is they don't have to counterattack you if they don't want to. And ultimately they don't even maybe have to attack if they don't want to. Now, if you attack them, you can certainly do that. It's just that they are not obliged to counterattack if they choose pitched battle, for instance. So an important nuance to the way supply source garrisons work in this game. Zocs do not extend across primary riverside hexes. That didn't really come up in my battle scenario, but I thought I'd point this out because it is the nuance and difference between a primary and secondary river. That, so ordinarily combat's not mandatory over a primary river bridge either. So even if there is a bridge there over the primary river, you don't have to have combat across it. You could choose to, but it's not mandatory, and counterattacks are not required across either river type. Because if there was a combat going on, you would simply, be able to say, I'm not counterattacking in a pitched battle situation. There are double losses for pursuit. If you go over an unbridged, unfrozen secondary river, in bridged primary rivers, no retreat is allowed across an unbridged, unfrozen primary river. So that's that situation where you can't retreat anymore, and you're going to take extra losses because you can't get any further. So it would be lovely to pin your enemy against a primary river like that. Not something that'll probably end up happening a lot. The losses of a force being pursued after combat will always be at least equal to the combat winner's losses, regardless of the actual pursuit. So this could be a case where maybe the loser the winner took one strength point loss, but the loser took a pursuit and that attacker failed to pursue them at all. They're gonna, even if they don't get pursued at all, any hexes, the loser is still going to lose that one strength point. So keep that in mind. And this just reflects sort of the attritional combat that could be taking place, that, there's always some loss to that retreating force, even if they're managing to get away pretty cleanly. Now for artillery, this is going to be important. They cannot be part of a pursuing force, and must be left behind if part of if the winning force wants to pursue. So they have to be left behind. The artillery has to be under the command of a leader or a major general that existed before the battle. So major generals can only be placed on the map in the organization segment. You can kind of do this without affecting the command span insubordination. There's a clause for that, but you need to leave the artillery behind, either with that major general that you pre-planned and put in the stack much earlier in the turn, or you have excess leaders that can stay behind, named leaders that can stay behind with the artillery, because this is not self-propelled artillery. They can't chase after the enemy. And if a force retreats and has artillery, so let's say you lost a battle and you're going to retreat and you chose pursuit, for better or for worse, just know that the first SP's loss from pursuit has to come from those artillery units. So watch out for that. In addition, in mud weather, artillery can only move 3 movement points. So in these cases where you could have some muddy weather early in the campaign, any force that's working with artillery is going to be much, 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 much slower than the rest of your forces on the map. Okay, so that was the first half. And, we had to go on to the back of the page to keep this going, guys. Are we having fun yet? All right. A leader that has a similarly named combat unit must have that unit on their organization display if it is not out of play, like it's been eliminated. It seems like the scenario setup information will imply that units can be on a different leader's display. This must be some form of error or errata and caused me a great deal of effing confusion early on. But in the exclusive rules, it actually notates this near the beginning, that there will be these leaders and their combat units, and the combat unit should be with their leaders. If for some reason that combat unit is with a different leader, it's because that leader is subordinate to the senior leader. I think this is a little funky. I really wish that the rules were a bit more clear, or the setup charts were not intentionally, well, they're not intentionally confusing, but in reality they're very confusing in this regard. Next up, forest terrain in this game is detrimental to defending units. Go look at the terrain chart. Seriously, it says that the defenders are halved, meaning don't get stuck in the forest. In fact, you probably want to avoid being in the forest. Now, this being more of an operational, almost strategic game, maybe this makes sense. Your formations can't actually be in good formations, that deep in the woods. Um, on the scale that we're talking about, we're talking about a scale where like your whole army could be in a forest. That's probably not actually good for the army, as opposed to a more tactical game, more zoomed in, where a hex takes up or is scaled to much less physical space, where if it's a copse of trees or something, or a lightly forested hill, you get some basic, protection from fire. But at this scale, we're probably looking more at the detrimental effect on the organization of the army and the ability to operate coherently amidst a very large forest expanse. So that's my thinking of it. That's my interpretation of it. But please be aware of that. Do not expect that you're going to get defensive bonuses in that terrain. You're not. During March attrition in mud weather, you do not have to lose the first SP from artillery if the force has artillery of 2 strength points or less. So this is something I got wrong. I had Napoleon lose a strength point of artillery. So this is one of these weird, strange rules that is in there that there's an exception if your artillery has 2 strength points or less. And honestly, in this game, that's the only case that exists, as far as I can tell. You don't actually lose that first SP during mud weather attrition. Very bizarre. I'm surprised at this. But I can only shrug. All right. Strength transfers between combat units are limited by both type and nationality. The nationality restriction is only indicated in the sequence of play summary. This is just one of those annoying rule placement thing. Now, depending on your version of the rules, maybe in a more recent version of the rules, this is fixed, but just be aware of that. It makes sense that there's a nationality restriction, but if you were to read the strength transfer rule paragraph that is in the rule book, you would miss that nationality restriction because it's only mentioned in a different place, which not helpful. Units in fortified towns and citadels are not required to attack or counterattack due to the negation of enemy Zocs. This is similar to the supply source garrison. You're getting extra protection, so you can opt to not counterattack. You can opt simply to not attack if you're next to the enemy like that. Citadels do allow up to 3 strength points present to ignore being attacked and instead force a siege, which there's a whole rule section about sieging. I'm not going to iterate that here, but just keep in mind, like that's when it becomes more likely that a force is going to be holed up in the citadel, or the maximum amount that's really going to get the citadel benefit. Retreating forces may stop their retreat in fortified towns regardless of the remaining retreat distance, and they don't have to worry about the pursuit thereafter. So meaning, like, if you had a retreat 3 hexes, but within 2 hexes you were in a fortified town, you could avoid retreating another hex. In campaign scenarios, if you move your center of operations, it will flip and be inactive until the consolidation segment of your next player turn's movement phase. This means you will miss out on AP accrual and movement commands during the next movement phase. That works a little bit different from the battle scenarios when you're dealing with moving the supply source, because in battle scenarios you're not using the center of operations. But this is something just to watch out for. I made a point here because while I've not started to play the campaign, this feels like a really important thing to be keeping in mind. Next, combat units cannot independently be dropped off during movement. They must be part of a force with a leader. If that force is dropped off in a hex with a friendly force, the command span of a leader present must be enough to command that whole stack, or displacement occurs where someone gets shifted out a hex. And I screwed this up in my game. You'll notice eventually I tried to drop off a combat unit with a different leader that wasn't doing anything. Can't actually do that. I will need to have had a major general predefined. Again, that happens earlier in the turn before you move. Needed to have a major general or a different leader drop off with that combat unit, and then assuming that the in place leader in that hex can command that leader or command that major general, then they can stay there. So watch out for it's not easy to drop stuff off to merge with other units. You really need to pay attention to the command span that limits you a great deal. If you force march a force to support a stack about to be attacked, the resulting stack in that hex must still be legal for command span purposes, or else displacement occurs. This means you cannot have Napoleon and his gigantic army with tons and tons of forces maxed out in his command span force march to reinforce Davout on the defense. You know, for him to be able to do that, Napoleon has to have command span available to be in the hex with the force that he's reinforcing, or the reinforcing force march force is small enough to fit in the command span of the force already in the hex. So you can't just bunch up everything in response to the enemy's attacks. You still have to observe the command span, even with those reinforcements coming in to respond to an enemy's potential attack during forced marching. So watch out for that. I think I violated this in the playthrough of the battle scenario, so word of the wise. And remember, stationary forces that did not move in the movement phase must still roll attrition unless they are in quarters. Now, granted, in many cases, that die roll is going to lead to 0 attrition no matter what you roll, so you can kind of avoid, in some cases, even the need to roll, but you still have to check and make sure of that and then roll. You know what I mean? Just keep that in mind. Like moving 0 movement points puts you in a pretty good spot. But if it's a very large force that didn't move, you could still end up with some attrition. So watch out. Do look at the rules for being in quarters. That's really important. That is a way for you to avoid attrition. But there are certain restrictions and penalties for being in quarters. So use carefully. And then finally, new garrisons for depots are placed during the organization segment. The rules literally say reorganization phase, which is not a thing. I am assuming that what they mean is that this is the organization segment, not the reorganization phase, because re and segment aren't applicable in the rules. I believe it is meaning to say that you create those garrisons for your depots by dropping off that strength point during the organization phase. This is the same phase that you're organizing or defining uh, major generals and all that other kind of good stuff. So, okay, do you feel like you've been hit with the whirlwind yet, guys? Um, Many of those things that I just dictated on my helpful sheet of the easily forgotten rules, I screwed up somewhere in the battle scenario, perhaps multiple times, sometimes to benefit both sides ultimately, but not really being authentic. So use that as a guide here, guys. Use that sheet, print it out if you're going to play, and keep those important factors in mind because they can affect the game quite a bit. And they certainly affected my game. Now, if I had played perfectly, things may have wound up maybe near the same place, but probably with some different results. So, if you're going to continue to watch the battle scenario just for the enjoyment of watching it and to see things being played poorly, be equipped with this information. Now, granted, with this information in your hands for part 0, you may choose not to watch the rest of the battle scenario videos, and I totally get that. We're just in a weird situation, so learn from my mistakes, use the handy dandy player aid sheet that I've fashioned and should be on Board Game Geek soon, if not already, and look to play the game that way. And I will be eventually playing the campaign scenario in this video series, and the campaign scenario will be played with all these lessons learned, but I won't be playing with as much detail, so you won't be seeing as much of it as we go. So there you go, guys. Those are some important things to watch out for, some easily forgotten rules, mistakes made that will be going on in the other parts of the Borodino sub series of this video series. Please consider that as you watch those videos and review the YouTube comments to see where these issues were pointed out during the recordings along the way. Sorry to have to do that. There was a point where I thought maybe I should just delete all these videos, but folks said leave them up as an example of what not to do, which, hey, you know what? That works for me, guys. This game is kind of tricky with these rules. I wish they were a little bit better organized. I wish they had more examples of play. but we're going to have to rough it that way. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video or can at least derive some goodness from it. And we'll see you in future videos. Thanks for watching.